The HOA thought they could scare off my wife with threats and police, but the moment Karen saw that military ID, her entire attitude changed. She wasn't just dealing with a new neighbor. She was messing with a high-ranking officer trained to handle far worse. The morning sun was just rising over the rooftops of the suburban neighborhood when the moving truck backed into the driveway. The quiet of the street was broken by the low rumble of the engine and the clang of the metal ramp hitting the pavement. Boxes marked kitchen, bedroom, and fragile began making their way from the truck to the house one by one.
Always.
Neighbors peeked out of windows, but no one said anything. The air held that polite tension common in HOA communities. Smiles. Reserved for later. Judgment reserved for now. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until the sound of firm footsteps approached from the sidewalk. A woman, mid-50s, rigid posture, clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon, appeared near the edge of the lawn. She wore a tight expression and a badge pinned to her shirt that read HOA Committee Chair. Without a greeting, without an introduction, she launched into rapid-fire questions. Who authorized this move-in? Where is the permit for delivery? Who are you exactly? There was no pause between inquiries, just the shrill edge of accusation laced into every syllable. She didn't ask if help was needed. She didn't welcome anyone to the neighborhood. Her first concern was control. Her eyes scanned the front yard like a general surveying enemy territory. The truck, the movers, the temporary mess of relocation all seemed to personally offend her. The woman demanded a form of identification, insisting that no one was allowed to take up residence without board verification. She pointed toward an invisible rulebook, quoting vague lines about occupancy and owner approval. She claimed the HOA had a strict protocol and that any violation would be met with immediate consequences. With arms crossed and lips pursed, he continued talking over every calm attempt at explanation. The fact that the home had already closed escrow, that the new owner had submitted all documentation, that the property taxes were now fully transferred, none of it mattered. In her mind, the person standing before her was an intruder, not a resident. The truth was irrelevant to her authority trip. Then came the threats. First, it was fines hundreds per day for violating HOA MOVN guidelines. Then it escalated. 2 claims that the police would be contacted for suspected trespassing. She reached into her pocket for her phone with theatrical purpose, clearly expecting fear, panic, or some kind of backing down. But instead she was met with silence and a steady gaze. The movers grew visibly uncomfortable, exchanging glances with each other. They had seen entitled people before, but something about this woman was different. She wasn't just difficult, she was obsessed with enforcement, as if the title HOA chair had granted her the powers of a sheriff, a judge, and a landlord, all in one. Her voice didn't rise in volume, but in self-righteousness. Her certainty made her louder than any shouting could have. She circled around to the driveway, taking photos with her phone of the truck, the boxers, the license plates. She muttered about reporting the moving company as well, alleging they were aiding unauthorized occupation. When one mover asked politely for space to carry a heavy box, she snapped, "Don't you touch anything else until this is resolved." Despite being completely unaware of the new homeowner's background, she assumed authority over everything. The lawn, the sidewalk, even the air between the house and the street. She declared that no keys had been registered with the HOA, that there was no proof of valid residency on record. But what she really meant was that she hadn't personally approved this person. That was unacceptable to her. Her behavior became more aggressive with each passing minute. When she saw the door unlock and open with ease, she claimed it was a break-in. When furniture was carried inside, she claimed it was destruction of property. Her voice grew shriller, her gestures more frantic. The clipboard slapped against her side as she walked in tight circles, narrating her grievances into her phone, likely hoping the 911 call would validate her delusions of control. What she failed to realize was that her intimidation tactics were backfiring. Each accusation only highlighted her ignorance. She never asked a single legitimate question. She never tried to understand who had moved in. She never paused to consider the possibility that everything was fully legal and properly filed. She wasn't interested in facts-only submission to her. This wasn't about rules. It was about presence. She saw a confident, composed woman moving in without her blessing, and that was enough to spark an all-out authority crisis. The HOA chair had encountered someone she couldn't immediately scare, someone who didn't shrink under baseless pressure. And that disturbed her more than any paperwork ever could. The tension crackled in the air, heavy and awkward, as the HOA woman stepped away from the porch and told the 911 operator she was reporting a possible squatter. She used the word like a dagger, expecting it to cut. But she had no idea just how badly she had miscalculated, and how that misjudgment would unfold the moment law enforcement arrived. The officers hadn't even arrived yet, but Karen was already preparing her victory lap. She stood at the end of the driveway with a smug look, arms crossed tightly, clipboard tucked under her elbow like a badge of honor. She had reported a suspicious woman unlawfully occupying property, and now she was savoring the idea of watching law enforcement escort the new homeowner off the premises. She spoke loudly on the phone to another board member, describing the incident as if she were dealing with a major security threat rather than a calm woman unpacking boxes. Neighbors began to peek out from their blinds and front porches, some casually strolling by to observe the commotion under the guise of walking dogs or checking mail. Karen didn't mind the attention. In fact, she welcomed it. Every audience member only added to the theater she was staging a dramatic enforcement of power, demonstration of what happened when someone dared to move in without going through her. She strutted around the driveway like she owned it. She pointed out violations to no one in particular, muttering about unsanctioned moving times, improper truck parking, and noise disturbances. She waved her arms dramatically toward the lawn, criticizing the temporary placement of furniture in boxes. She even pulled out a folder with printed copies of community rules, holding it up like scripture. It wasn't about the rules themselves.
No.
It was about the illusion of control. Karen thrived on power, not legitimate authority, but the kind built on fear and intimidation. She didn't need truth, only perception. If she looked confident enough, loud enough, entitled enough, most people would comply. That strategy had worked on delivery drivers, contractors, even new families too polite to argue, but this time it wasn't working. Every time she pushed harder, the calm demeanor of the homeowner pushed back, not with aggression, but with quiet defiance. No shouting, no panic, no need to argue, just firm replies, direct eye contact, and a slow, deliberate pace that made Karen even more irate. It was the kind of control she couldn't break, and she hated it. The movers had gone silent. Eyes shifted from Karen to the homeowner like spectators, unsure of which side was actually in charge. A few quietly continued unloading items, unsure whether to stop or proceed. Karen barked at them to halt, claiming that operations on the premises are under review pending HOA approval. The movers looked confused, but followed orders just to avoid further confrontation. She then demanded to see a lease agreement or a deed, documents she had no legal right to request. She said the HOA required advance notice of any occupancy changes. She insisted there was a mandatory inspection period before keys could be used. She scrolled through her phone, searching for codes that didn't exist, citing fictitious clauses. With unwavering certainty, when that didn't work, she turned to the classic neighborhood tactic, shaming. She began loudly proclaiming that strangers had moved in without notice, that she had never seen this person in any community meetings, that no one in the neighborhood had been notified of a transfer of ownership. She used the words security risk and protocol violation like weapons, hoping someone else would join her crusade, but no one did. The crowd didn't grow. The neighbors didn't gather on her side. They watched from afar, quietly assessing. They may have had their own grievances with the HOA, or perhaps they had been victims of Karen's overreach before. Whatever the reason, no one jumped in to support her. Still, she pressed forward, now planting herself on the property line like a bouncer at a private event. She told the homeowner she couldn't bring anything else inside until she received written clearance. She threatened to fine $250 per day for unauthorized move-ins. She warned that future packages might be denied or confiscated if the issue wasn't resolved properly through HOA channels. She mistook silence for weakness. What she couldn't see was that every moment she escalated, she dug herself deeper. Every lie, every threat, every violation of personal boundaries would eventually come back to haunt her, but she was too blinded by her power trip to notice. Karen's voice had reached the same sharp lecturing pitch she used at every monthly HOA meeting. Her words dripped with superiority, her tone thick with years of entitlement. She had always operated with the belief that if she acted like she was in charge, no one would challenge her. But this time, her usual tactics weren't being met with nervous apologies or desperate compliance. They were met with composure, documentation, and unwavering poise. The very fact that her intimidation wasn't working made her lash out harder, as if sheer persistence could wear down logic and rights. She began circling the moving truck, pretending to look for violations. She snapped pictures of license plates, called in a complaint to the HOA board, and even muttered about contacting the property management company to initiate fines for community disturbance. The spectacle became so drawn out that even the movers began exchanging amused looks. And still the homeowner didn't budge. No shouting, no backing down. Just calm, quiet, unshakable presence. Karen was too caught up in her own storm to realize that the real storm hadn't even begun. She was moments away from a reckoning she wasn't prepared for, because she had no idea who she was dealing with, or what that military ID would soon reveal to everyone watching. The wailing siren didn't come, but the sight of a black and white cruiser slowly rolling into the neighborhood was enough to draw eyes from every corner of the street. Karen straightened her shoulders like she had just been called to testify. In court, her entire posture shifted into performance mode, one she had likely rehearsed countless times. As the car parked neatly by the curb, she walked toward it with an air of urgency. Waving her clipboard like it was a beacon of justice, 2 officers stepped out, calm and methodical. Neither seemed alarmed. Their body language suggested they were responding to a routine neighbor dispute, not a crime in progress. But Karen was determined to sell them a different version. She immediately launched into a rapid-fire summary of her fabricated crisis unauthorized residency. Suspicious individual, no HOA clearance, possible squatting. She pointed repeatedly toward the house as though expecting them to draw weapons at any moment. The officers listened politely, glancing toward the moving truck and the workers who were now frozen in place, clearly trying to decide whether they should keep unloading or stay out of it. Karen kept her voice loud, ensuring that neighbors could hear every word. She wanted a scene. She wanted people to see her enforcing order. In her mind, she was the last line of defense between civility and chaos. One of the officers raised a hand, signaling her to pause. They turned toward the homeowner, who had been calmly stacking boxes on the porch until now. No panic, no retreat, just a quiet pause as she walked forward to meet them, shoulders square, eyes steady. The moment was silent for a beat too long. Then she reached into her wallet and held up a military ID. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. The officers took one look at the ID and straightened slightly, a subtle but clear gesture of respect. The senior officer nodded once, scanning the name and credentials. A quick glance at the address confirmed everything. The house was legally purchased. The ID matched the deed. Everything Karen had claimed unraveled in seconds. The officer's tone changed. He was no longer questioning. He was clarifying, verifying information, not interrogating. The words he used were calm, professional, and respectful. Karen's expression twitched. She leaned in, trying to interject. But her words lost their volume as she realized something was wrong. Very wrong. She tried again, insisting the HOA had not been notified of any new residents. She gestured toward her clipboard, citing arbitrary bylaws. She claimed she had every right to investigate suspicious activity. But this time, the officers barely looked her way. One of them gently motioned for her to step back. The other continued speaking with the homeowner, who handed over printed documents, closing papers, the title deed, and an official transfer of ownership. Every sheet of paper was crisp, dated, notarized. Every signature matched. There was no dispute, no question, no cause for concern. Then came the moment Karen hadn't anticipated, the officer asking her a question instead. "Ma'am, You have any legal authority to request identification or restrict access to this property? She hesitated, blinking. Fast. Well, I'm the HOA chair. That's not what I asked. The officer's tone wasn't aggressive, but it was firm. He repeated the question. Karen stumbled through an explanation involving community regulations, board meetings, and property appearance standards, but her voice had lost its edge. Her earlier confidence had drained into nervous qualifiers and vague references. The badge and uniform in front of her held real authority, and for the first time that morning, she couldn't bluff her way past it. The second officer turned toward her and added, "This property is privately owned. The individual present is the verified owner and has full legal rights to reside here. There's no evidence of criminal activity, and unless you have a court order or evidence of fraud, we can't detain anyone or interfere." Karen's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out, and the first officer added with deliberate clarity, "You do not have the right to accuse someone of trespassing on their own property, especially not someone serving in the military, who's just returned stateside." Silence. The weight of those words settled on everyone watching. The neighbors, who had stayed hidden behind curtains and porch railings, now had all the context they needed. Karen's grand display had collapsed under the pressure of facts, professionalism, and one simple truth: she was wrong. Karen tried one last tactic. She softened her voice, switched to faux concern, and suggested there had simply been a misunderstanding. She said she just wanted to keep the neighborhood safe, but no one was buying it anymore. The officers thanked the homeowner for her cooperation and apologized for the inconvenience. They told her she was free to continue with the move, and offered to remain nearby for a few minutes in case further harassment occurred. Karen stood off to the side, motionless, unable to process how quickly the power had shifted. The clipboard now looked more like a prop than a badge. Her certainty had evaporated. The performance was over. And just like that, the woman she tried to frame as a threat had become the one protected by law enforcement. With credentials and documentation Karen could never touch. The moment the officers stepped back and allowed the move-in to continue, everything shifted. The movers resumed their tasks, visibly relieved. Neighbors quietly returned to their routines, most without a word, though a few offered nods of respect. In the homeowner's direction, tension that had hung in the air so heavily just minutes before had broken like a storm cloud cleared by truth, exposed by authority. But the only one still standing frozen in disbelief was Karen. She hadn't expected this outcome. She had built the entire confrontation on the assumption that she held the upper hand. Her clipboard, her bylaws, her supposed knowledge of HOA procedures, all of it had been her armor. And yet none of it mattered once the truth came to light. The military ID had shattered the illusion. Karen's eyes lingered on the ID longer than necessary, as if hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves to fit her narrative. They didn't. The name matched the deed. The rank etched into the card, clearly visible and clearly above. Anything Karen could comprehend silenced her more effectively than any argument ever could. The officers didn't gloat. They didn't lecture. They simply acknowledged the facts and moved on. That neutrality stung even more. Karen wanted drama, escalation, maybe even a scene that validated her superiority. What she got instead was quiet dismissal, no control, no validation, just irrelevance. She stepped aside, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked. Her arms no longer crossed with confidence, but clutched around her clipboard like a shield. Her voice, once sharp and commanding, had gone soft and uncertain. Her gaze, which had hovered boldly over every box and item on the property, now flickered downward with a kind of subdued panic. She wasn't in charge anymore. She never had been. The homeowner didn't need to gloat either. She simply returned to what she was doing, lifting boxes, arranging furniture, managing the movers without acknowledging Karen's presence at all. That silence carried more weight than any confrontation could. It was the silence of someone who had already won. Someone who didn't need to waste energy on someone so thoroughly out of her depth. What unsettled Karen most wasn't just the ID, or the officer's reaction, or even the public failure. Was the realization that she had underestimated someone who outranked her in every possible way legally. professionally and socially. She had tried to dominate someone trained to remain calm under pressure, to lead under fire, to carry authority without needing to prove it, and that mistake would haunt her long after the officers left. The neighbors. Once curious spectators now had their verdict. Whispers started quietly. Texts were sent. Screenshots of the incident, captured from across the street, began circulating in neighborhood group chats. Karen's reputation, once carefully managed and inflated by her self-appointed status, began to deflate with every message. The woman she had tried to paint as a problem was now being spoken about with admiration and respect. People talked, they always did. But now, instead of fearing Karen, they questioned her judgment. They wondered how many other confrontations had been based on nothing but ego and assumption. They remembered moments when she'd used her position to intimidate or silence others. And now they had a clear example, undeniable, and public of her overreach finally hitting a wall she couldn't climb. Karen tried to recover. She mumbled something about protocols and documentation as she walked back toward her house. She paused halfway down the sidewalk, turned, as if debating whether to make one last comment, then thought better of it and kept walking. Her pace quickened. Her shoulders hunched slightly. She didn't look back. From that day on, things changed in the neighborhood. Karen no longer strutted at HOA meetings. Her emails to residents became fewer, shorter, less authoritative. She stopped citing rules that didn't exist and withdrew from her usual morning inspection walks. The clipboard disappeared. The self-appointed title of community enforcer faded with it, and every time she passed the house she once claimed wasn't authorized, she looked away. The woman she had tried to intimidate had become a quiet force in the neighborhood. Polite, professional, always composed, but no one missed the undercurrent of quiet strength. She didn't need to assert dominance. She didn't seek attention. Her presence alone spoke volumes. And everyone who had witnessed the confrontation remembered exactly how it played out. Karen learned too late that not all authority wears a uniform. Some carry it in silence, in training, in presence. And when that authority is tested, it doesn't fight back with noise. It wins with facts, composure, and clarity. It was the kind of defeat that couldn't be undone with apologies or explanations. Karen had messed with someone far beyond her reach. And now, every passing glance, every awkward silence in community meetings, every sidelong look from neighbors reminded her of that fact. The clipboard had been put down, but the consequences had only begun. The HOA meeting that month was packed more than usual. Folding chairs filled the small community center room. Normally, attendants barely scraped together a quorum, but this time nearly everyone showed up. Some came out of curiosity, others out of support, but most came because word had spread. The story of what happened during the move-in had traveled through every email thread, group chat, and casual sidewalk conversation in the neighborhood. Karen sat at the front. As usual, her nameplate set neatly in front of her, but she didn't look like she usually did. No confident posture. No clipboard cradled in her arms. Just a stiff smile that barely held up under the weight of so many eyes. The new homeowner entered quietly, file folder in hand. She didn't need to speak loudly or grandstand. She simply waited for the agenda to reach the public comment section, then stood and approached the table. No dramatics, no accusations, just facts. She laid the folder down and opened it. Were printed statements, dated emails, the signed deed of ownership, and a copy of the police report from the day Karen called 911 to report a trespasser. The room stayed quiet as she listed the timeline when she moved in. What, Karen? Said how the situation escalated and how it ended. No exaggerations. No bitterness, just calm, professional delivery. She spoke not just as a homeowner, but as someone who had been wrongfully targeted by a representative of the HOA. Her complaint was formal, composed, and thoroughly documented. The board members shifted in their seats. Some had known Karen for years. They'd overlooked her behavior in the past because she was organized or detail-oriented. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a pattern. It's a pattern that finally had public evidence, Karen tried to respond. She offered a shallow apology, more of a deflection than an admission. She insisted she was acting in the best interest of the neighborhood. She claimed she was just being cautious. But her voice was tight, brittle. Every excuse she gave seemed to fall flatter than the last. The board president asked a few questions, and another member asked why Karen hadn't consulted the HOA directory before calling the police. Someone else pointed out that the closing had been listed in the monthly ownership transfer update. Karen had received it weeks before the incident. Silence followed. The homeowner didn't press further. She thanked the board for their time and returned to her seat. She didn't need to say more. The facts had already spoken. The room had heard everything it needed to. A motion was proposed, something simple, but serious. A formal reprimand for Karen's abuse of authority. No vote was taken that night, but murmurs of support echoed around the room. One member asked to review the HOA's community engagement procedures. Another requested a revision to the complaint policy. It was clear this wasn't going to be swept aside. Karen didn't speak again for the rest of the meeting afterward. Neighbors who had barely interacted before now approached the new homeowner. Some apologized for not stepping in during the incident. Others shared their own quiet frustrations with Karen's behavior over the years and authorized warnings. Notes taped to doors, unsolicited lectures about lawn length or parking spots. For the first time, someone had stood up, and that courage had opened the door for others to speak. Over the following weeks, the ripple effects continued. Karen stopped leading meetings. Her emails became infrequent, stripped of their usual forceful tone. Several board members pushed for new leadership. Others suggested term limits and accountability measures. What had started as a power trip on a driveway turned into a full-scale reevaluation of how the HOA operated. The community changed subtly but significantly. The air was lighter. Residents no longer felt watched or judged every time they rolled out a trash bin or parked slightly off-center. Conversations became more relaxed, friendly even. And the new homeowner, without trying, became a quiet symbol of dignity and strength. She didn't need to remind anyone of what happened. She didn't boast or mention her rank. She simply went about her days walking her dog, trimming the hedges, waving to passing neighbors. But every interaction carried the memory of that day. Every eye that met hers remembered the calm, the patience, and the restraint she showed Devin when she had every right to be furious. Karen, on the other hand, faded into the background. Her authority was broken not by shouting, but by truth. And the neighborhood, now wide awake, no longer saw her as the one in charge. The HOA didn't collapse. It adapted. With more eyes on leadership, more fairness in enforcement, and more humility. In meetings, it became a better version of itself. One no longer ruled by fear, but guided by mutual respect, and all because one woman stood on her porch, faced down a lie, and held up an ID that reminded everyone in that community exactly who they were dealing with.